Bigfoot is perhaps the most famous cryptid in the world, a huge hair-covered bipedal creature inhabiting the forests of North America. An image familiar to everyone, from a 5-year-old child to a professor of zoology. Hundreds of documentary films have been made about Bigfoot, thousands of books written, and millions of t-shirts sold. The industry around Bigfoot is estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars annually. But behind this show, business stands a simple question to which science is obliged to give an honest answer. Does Bigfoot exist, or could he exist in theory? Wouldn't it be great if he existed? And specifically, what do the scientific data say? What evidence has been presented? How was it checked? And what follows from this check? Let us break everything down in order. Without sensations, without conspiracy theories, only facts. Let us start with the most famous evidence, the Patterson-Gimlin film. October 20th, 1967, two cowboys from Washington, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, filmed a short movie on a 16mm camera in the Bluff Creek area of Northern California. The film shows a large bipedal creature covered in dark hair, which walks along a dried-up creek bed, turns toward the camera, and goes into the forest. The clip lasts less than a minute, but this minute has become, probably, the most analyzed piece of motion picture film in the history of cryptozoology. What does science say? For over 50 years, the film has been studied by dozens of specialists, from biomechanists to Hollywood special effects masters. Opinions were divided, and this in itself is indicative. Part of the experts in biomechanics, in particular Jeff Meldrum, a professor of anatomy from Idaho State University, point out that the gait of the creature on the film differs from a human one. The knees remain bent throughout the entire walking cycle, the so-called compliant gait, characteristic of large primates but unnatural for a human. Muscle mass in the area of the hips and buttocks, judging by the proportions, significantly exceeds human mass. The creature does not fit into the usual anthropometric parameters of a human in a suit. On the other hand, and this is important, not one of these arguments is irrefutable. Philip Morris, a Hollywood master of making gorilla suits, claimed that he sold Patterson a gorilla suit shortly before the filming. His testimony was not confirmed documentarily, but it was not refuted either. Bob Hieronymus, an acquaintance of Patterson, stated in 2004 that it was he who was the person in the suit. His testimony is also neither confirmed nor refuted. Patterson died in 1972 without leaving a confession of a hoax, but also without providing convincing evidence of authenticity. Gimlin is still alive and insists that he saw a real creature. It is worth adding that in 2022, Canadian researcher Daniel Perez conducted a computer analysis of the film using image stabilization and resolution enhancement technologies unavailable in the 60s. His conclusion was ambiguous. The improved image shows something similar to muscle contractions under the skin of the creature in the area of the thigh and back. If this is a suit, it would have to have built-in mechanisms for imitating musculature. Technology that in 1967, if it existed at all, was only in the most expensive Hollywood studios, and not at the disposal of two cowboys with a budget of several $1,000s. Opponents of authenticity respond. The quality of the film is so low that muscle contractions may be artifacts of graininess, lighting, or compression. The dispute continues, and likely will never be resolved unless the suit itself is found or a living creature is discovered. The bottom line on the Patterson-Gimlin film. After 57 years of analysis, the scientific community has not reached a consensus. This is not proof of the existence of Bigfoot, but it is also not a proven fake. This is uncertainty, and in science, uncertainty is not equal to confirmation. The burden of proof lies on the one who asserts the existence of a new species and not on the one who denies it. Let us move on to footprints. Footprints are the most mass evidence of the existence of Bigfoot. Thousands of prints have been found, photographed, and cast in plaster over decades throughout North America. A typical Bigfoot footprint: a foot length from 35 to 45 centimeters, a width of about 20, with 5 toes and without a pronounced arch. Flat-footedness. Jeff Meldrum, mentioned above, collected a collection of more than 300 plaster casts and analyzed them from the point of view of functional anatomy. His conclusion: part of the footprints demonstrate anatomical features that are difficult to fake. In particular, the midfoot break, a longitudinal ridge on the sole, characteristic of a foot adapted to movement over uneven terrain. Meldrum asserts that this feature is not found in humans and is not reproduced by simple pressing of a wooden form into the ground. However, the problem with the footprints is the same as with the film: lack of control. The overwhelming majority of footprints were found by enthusiasts, and not by professional trackers or scientists. Discovery conditions are not documented according to scientific standards, and, what is critically important, we know for sure that a significant part of the footprints are fakes. In 2002, after the death of Ray Wallace, a construction contractor from Washington State, his family made public a pair of wooden feet about 40 centimeters long, which Wallace used for making fake Bigfoot footprints, starting from 1958. It was Wallace's footprints that became one of the main reasons for the Bigfoot boom in the late 50s and early 60s. The irony is that the word Bigfoot itself, Bigfoot, was invented by journalists describing the tracks left by the wooden soles of Ray Wallace. Does this mean that all footprints are fake? No. Meldrum and his supporters assert that among thousands of casts, there are dozens that are impossible to explain by forgery. Too complex anatomy, too realistic dynamics of soil deformation. But impossible to explain by forgery is not the same as proof of the existence of a new species. Footprints are circumstantial evidence, and without a body, a skeleton, or at least an unambiguous genetic sample, they cannot serve as a basis for scientific recognition. Now, genetics. This is perhaps the most objective method of verification. DNA does not lie. If a sample of tissue, hair, or saliva contains the DNA of an unknown primate, this will be irrefutable proof. Over decades, enthusiasts collected hair samples found in forests and sent them to laboratories for analysis. The results were systematically disappointing. The most large-scale genetic study was conducted in 2014 by Brian Sykes, a professor of genetics at Oxford University, one of the leading world specialists on DNA. Sykes collected 36 hair samples, presumably belonging to Bigfoot, Yeti, and other unknown primates from different countries of the world. Each sample was provided by people sincerely convinced of its anomalous origin. Sykes analyzed the DNA of each sample and published the results in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Proceedings of the Royal Society B. Results: out of 36 samples, not one contained the DNA of an unknown primate. Every single one was identified as belonging to known animals: bears, black, brown, Himalayan, cows, horses, raccoons, deer, porcupines, wolves, and humans. 2 samples from the Himalayas, presumably Yeti hair, turned out to belong to a rare subspecies of brown bear. Not one unknown primate. 0. Sykes is not a skeptic in the usual sense of the word. He approached the study without bias and publicly stated that he would be glad to discover an anomalous result. He did not discover one. His conclusion was restrained but unambiguous. To date, there is not a single genetic proof of the existence of a large unknown primate in North America or anywhere else. There was another attempt, more ambitious and more controversial. In 2012, veterinarian Melba Ketchum announced that her laboratory had sequenced the Bigfoot genome from samples provided by cryptid hunters. According to her, the DNA indicated a hybrid organism, half human, half unknown primate, The statement caused a sensation in cryptozoological circles, but was met with devastating criticism from geneticists. Ketchum was unable to publish the results in any peer-reviewed journal. Everyone refused due to methodological problems. As a result, she bought her own journal and published the article there. Independent geneticists who gained access to her data established that the Bigfoot genome is a contaminated sample containing a mixture of human DNA and opossum DNA. The Ketchum story became a textbook example of how the desire to find Bigfoot can lead to catastrophic errors in the interpretation of data. Now let us talk about the ecological argument, and this is possibly the strongest argument against the existence of Bigfoot. Any large animal leaves traces in the ecosystem that are impossible to hide. It eats, and this affects the vegetation and prey populations. It defecates, and the excrement can be found and analyzed. It dies and leaves a skeleton. It reproduces, and to maintain a viable population, a minimum of several hundred or better several thousand individuals is necessary. Let us imagine that Bigfoot exists. This is a large primate weighing from 150 to 300 kilograms, if you believe the descriptions. To maintain a genetically viable population, at least 500 individuals are needed. This is the lower limit, below which inbreeding will destroy the species in a few generations. 500 large primates living in the forests of North America. Each of them daily consumes several kilograms of food, leaves tracks, breaks branches, builds nests or shelters, makes sounds, defecates, loses hair, gets sick, and dies. And at the same time, in the entire history of observations, not one body, not one skeleton, not one tooth, not one reliable photograph, not one genetically confirmed sample. In an era when millions of camera traps are installed in the forests of North America to monitor wildlife, not one of them has recorded Bigfoot. Camera traps record lynxes, cougars, bears, wolverines, animals that actively avoid humans and are encountered extremely rarely. But not one trap has caught Bigfoot. Not one. To this should be added the data from thermal imaging surveys. Within the framework of several television projects, in particular the show Finding Bigfoot, which lasted more than 10 seasons, film crews spent thousands of hours in forests with military-grade thermal imagers capable of detecting a warm-blooded creature the size of a human at a distance of several hundred meters. Result 0. Not one unidentified thermal trace. Thermal imagers recorded deer, bears, coyotes, rabbits. Everything that lives in the forest and has a body temperature higher than the environment, but nothing that would correspond to a large primate. There is also one more method that in recent years has revolutionized zoology: environmental DNA, or eDNA. Any living creature leaves traces of its DNA in the environment, in water, in soil, in the air, skin cells, saliva, excrement, hair. All this contains genetic material that can be collected and analyzed, even if the animal itself is long gone. The eDNA method is so sensitive that it allows for the detection of the presence of fish in a lake from 1 liter of water taken from the shore. If a population of large primates lived in the forests of North America, their eDNA would inevitably be present in water samples from rivers and lakes, in soil samples along trails, in air filters. Several studies purposefully searched for anomalous primate DNA in samples from areas where reports of Bigfoot are especially frequent. The Pacific Northwest, Sierra Nevada, Appalachia. Result the same familiar picture. Bears, deer, humans. No unknown primates. For comparison, when in 2002 the Saola was discovered in the jungles of Vietnam, a large, even-toed ungulate described as the Asian unicorn, its existence was confirmed by horns, hides, genetic samples, and photos from camera traps. The Saola is one of the rarest and most secretive large animals on the planet, living in one of the most inaccessible forests in the world, and even it was successfully documented. Bigfoot, presumably living in forests through which millions of tourists, hunters, and foresters pass annually, is documented by nothing that stands up to scientific verification. There is also a paleontological argument. Proponents of Bigfoot often point to Gigantopithecus, an extinct giant primate that lived in South and Southeast Asia from 9 million to 100,000 years ago. Gigantopithecus was huge, estimated up to 3 meters tall and weighing up to 500 kilograms. It walked most likely on 4 legs like modern orangutans, but its size makes it an attractive candidate for the role of a Bigfoot ancestor. Maybe Gigantopithecus did not go extinct, but migrated across the Bering Bridge to North America and evolved into Bigfoot. The problem is that there is not a single piece of evidence for this hypothesis. All remains of Gigantopithecus were found in Asia. Not a single bone in North America. The Bering Bridge connected Asia and America during ice ages, but the climate of Beringia was subarctic. Tundra, permafrost, icy winds. For a large tropical primate adapted to the bamboo forests of Southeast Asia, crossing the Arctic tundra would have been impossible. Furthermore, Gigantopithecus went extinct about 100,000 years ago, long before the last glacial maximum when the Bering Bridge was most passable. The chronology does not match, the geography does not match, the paleontology does not match. Separately, it is worth mentioning the psychological aspect, because without it, the picture would be incomplete. Why do people see Bigfoot? Tens of thousands of people throughout North America reported encounters with a large bipedal creature in the forests. They are not all liars and not all madmen. Most of them are normal, sensible people who sincerely believe they saw something unusual. How can this be explained? Neuropsychology offers several answers. First, pareidolia, the property of the brain to recognize familiar patterns, in particular figures and faces in random visual stimuli. In the gloom of the forest, in conditions of limited visibility, stress, and expectation, the brain easily assembles from shadows, tree trunks, and the play of light a figure similar to a large bipedal creature. Second identification error. A bear standing on its hind legs, and bears do this regularly, is surprisingly similar to Bigfoot, especially at dusk at a distance during brief observation. A black bear on its hind legs reaches a height of about 2 meters. It is covered in dark hair and moves on 2 legs awkwardly but confidently. In conditions of stress and unexpectedness, an observer easily takes a bear for an unknown creature. Third infrasound. Some researchers suggest that the wind passing through certain mountain formations generates infrasonic vibrations, sounds below the threshold of human hearing, which cause a feeling of anxiety, panic, and a sense of presence. This can explain why many encounters with Bigfoot are accompanied by descriptions of inexplicable fear and a feeling that you are being watched. One cannot fail to mention acoustic evidence as well. Enthusiasts have for years recorded sounds in the forests that they attribute to Bigfoot. Distant cries, knocking on trees, whistling. The most famous recording, the so-called Sierra Kills, made in 1971 in California. Bioacousticians from the University of Wyoming analyzed the recording and concluded that the frequency range and modulation do not correspond to any known animal of North America. It sounds impressive, but does not correspond to known, does not mean belongs to unknown. Forest acoustics are complex. Echoes, interference, the superposition of sounds from several sources can create recordings that are not similar to anything and at the same time are not evidence of a new species. A separate topic is the economics of Bigfoot. The cryptozoology industry brings in hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Books, films, TV shows, souvenirs, excursion tours in the footsteps of Bigfoot, festivals, and conferences. The town of Willow Creek in California, the place where the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot, lives off tourism related to Bigfoot. A museum, statues, an annual festival, dozens of small towns throughout the Pacific Northwest exploit the legend as a source of income. This creates a powerful economic incentive for maintaining the myth and for creating new evidence. Not all witnesses lie for the sake of money, of course, but an ecosystem in which an encounter with Bigfoot can get you an interview on television, an invitation to a conference, and book sales is an ecosystem in which honesty is not the main priority. There is also a cultural aspect. Bigfoot is not an invention of the 20th century. Legends of large, hair-covered human-like creatures inhabiting the forests have existed among the indigenous peoples of North America for millennia. The Salish called him Sasquatch, hence the second name Sasquatch. The Lummi called him Tsulku, Stuatachti. Each tribe had its own version of the forest giant, and these legends, passing from generation to generation, created a cultural background against which any unusual observation in the forest is automatically interpreted as an encounter with Bigfoot. This does not mean that the legends of indigenous peoples are false. They reflect real experience of interaction with wild nature, but they also form expectations that influence the interpretation of what is seen. Let us summarize. What does science say about Bigfoot as of today? The Patterson-Gimlin film is not confirmed and not refuted. There is no scientific consensus. It is not proof. Footprints. Thousands discovered, a significant part are proven fakes. The remaining ones are interesting, but without context prove nothing. Genetics. Not one of the dozens of analyzed samples contained the DNA of an unknown primate. All turned out to be known animals. The ecological argument. For a viable population, hundreds of individuals are needed. Not one body, skeleton, tooth, or reliable shot from a camera trap has been found. Paleontology. Gigantopithecus is not the ancestor of Bigfoot. Chronology, geography, and biology do not confirm the connection. Psychology, pareidolia. Identification errors. Bear on hind legs. Infrasound and cultural expectations explain most encounters. The scientific verdict is unambiguous. To date, there is not a single proof of the existence of Bigfoot that would stand up to verification by standard scientific methods. This does not mean that Bigfoot cannot exist in principle. Science does not operate with absolute negations. New species of large animals are discovered in the 21st century as well. The Saola in Vietnam, the Olinguito in Ecuador, the Kodiak frog in Alaska. But each of these discoveries was backed by physical samples, bodies, skeletons, genetic material. Bigfoot is backed by nothing but witness testimony, blurry photographs, and plaster casts, not one of which passes scientific verification. Does this mean that the search should be stopped? Not necessarily. Science is organized so that any hypothesis remains open until it is finally refuted. If tomorrow someone finds a body, a skeleton, or a genetically verified sample of Bigfoot tissue, science will accept this as a fact and rebuild its models. This will happen instantly because science does not cling to its conclusions. It follows the evidence. But so far, there is no such evidence. An honest answer to the question of whether Bigfoot exists sounds like this: most likely not. And most likely not is not cowardice and not an evasion of an answer. It is a precise formulation of the degree of our confidence based on all available data. Science is not obliged to give people the answers they want to hear. It is obliged to give answers that are confirmed by facts. And facts say Bigfoot is a myth. A beautiful, resilient, commercially successful myth. No, a myth. And, maybe, in this, lies its real value not as a biological species, but as a cultural phenomenon. Bigfoot is a mirror in which our desire to believe that the world still holds secrets is reflected. That in the forest behind your house, a creature that science has not yet discovered may be hiding. That not everything is measured and explained. In a world where satellites photograph every square meter of the planet, and DNA analysis determines a species by one hair, Bigfoot is the last bastion of the unknown. And that is precisely why people so do not want to part with him, because a world in which Bigfoot is possible is more interesting than a world in which he is not. But science exists not to make the world more interesting. It exists to make it more understandable. And the understandable world without Bigfoot, but with bears that stand on their hind legs, with infrasound that causes paranoia, and with a brain that sees faces in shadows. This world, if you think about it, is no less amazing. Simply, its wonders are real.